नमस्ते, आप सभी का स्वागत है आज 7 बजे के इस कार्यक्रम में। और आज हमारे साथ है पुनः सीताराम गोयल शताब्दी श्रृंखला में सीताराम गोयल सेंटिनरी सीरीज, और हमारे साथ कोनराड एल्स्ट और शंकर शरण जी पिछली बार की तरह। और हम चर्चा करने जा रहे हैं, वी आर गोइंग टू डिस्कस द कैलकटा कुरान Petition, celebrated book by श्री सीताराम जी गोयल। बहुत प्रसिद्ध उनकी ये पुस्तक है और ये है पुस्तक, यह है इसका कवर। ये एक्चुअली हमारे यहाँ डिजिटल ग्रीन स्क्रीन की वजह से स्पष्ट नहीं दिखाई पड़ रहा है। And without much ado, let me go straight to Koenraad. Koenraad, this book, actually, it's a pioneering book in many ways because it does what is called in the Indian tradition, Purva Paksh. That was waiting to happen for a very long time. It was not done for nearly 700 years. A brief Purva Paksh was done by Maharshi Dayanand, but even that was not as comprehensive because that was more on the philosophical aspects, but this is more on the practical aspects. So this is so important according to me, because the Purva Paksha was probably done in a very comprehensive manner, tackling both theology as well as its practical application. The interesting part of this book is, I have the second edition of this book. This book is actually 318 pages. And the introduction runs into 238 pages. So, Koenraad, what do you make of that? 318-page book having a 238-page introduction.
There is, of course, a lot more to say than simply a list of ayats or Quranic verses that provoke violence and hatred. You see, the original Calcutta Quran petition and even the published version of it, which is the first edition of the book, is not very long. It is precisely that list. And the list is not even complete. You could make a longer list of hateful and inimical verses in the Quran. But okay, you see, these verses are really there. That's not propaganda. That's not made up. That's not extreme right wing or Islamophobic or so. Those verses are there. They are learned. Most Muslims who know their Quran know these verses. But, you know, to get a full picture of Muhammad, you need to also study his life, which is mainly in the Orthodox biography by Ibn Ishaq. There is an also Orthodox translation of it available, published in Karachi. So although it was made by an Englishman, Guillaume, and so everybody can buy it and check it, but here you find a very good overview in the long introduction to this book. So what the introduction does is to show how these verses in the Quran, deemed sacred by Muslims, have effectively led to a lot of hostility and violence, both during the life of the Prophet, which then further served as precedent, as model behavior, and then in the history of Islam outside and inside India till today. So that's the service that Sitaram Goel renders. He makes available for everyone the facts laid down in Islamic scripture of the violence wrought by Islam. So that's a long job. There's lots of it. So naturally, this introduction is quite long. As for the text itself, so there was a petition by Chanmal Chopra entered in the Calcutta High Court, and so that listed these verses that argued that this book, the Quran, clearly is in violation of Article 295A of the Indian Penal Code, which prohibits spreading hatred against other religions, and that therefore it should be banned. Now, the judge rejected this, arguing that this prohibition requires a clear intention. You see, you may do something that happens to provoke violence, but that's not covered by this law if there is no intention to provoke violence. And so in the judge's opinion, the Quran did not show any intention to provoke enmity or violence. That is, of course, a debating point. But anyway, that's what this book reports. And so to allow the reader to judge for himself, Sitaram Goel has provided a number of data in ancient and more recent history that shows that perhaps after all, there was an intention of creating hostility and violence.
शंकर शरण जी, आप कैसे देखते हैं इसे?
मैं तो इसे बहुत एक अभूतपूर्व घटना के रूप में देखता हूँ। इनफैक्ट ये स्वयं सीताराम गोयल जी ने भी लिखा है कि ये जो याचिका चांदमल चोपड़ा ने डाली थी, ये पूरे रिलीजियस हिस्ट्री में ये एक अभूतपूर्व घटना है। कुरान 1400 सालों से है, लेकिन ये पहली बार हुआ कि कोर्ट में जाकर के किसी ने कुरान को चुनौती दी, ये कहते हुए कि ये हिंसा भड़काती है, लोगों के बीच दुश्मनी पैदा करती है और ये समाज के लिए हानिकारक पुस्तक है। और सच पूछिए तो इससे पहले, ये गोयल जी खुद कहते हैं कि इससे पहले फॉर सेंचुरीज ये उल्टा था मामला। ये जो जिसको अब्राहमिक रिलीजन्स कहते हैं, वो वही कहते थे कि ये पगान्स लोग जो हैं, ये इनके फॉल्स गॉड्स हैं, इनकी जो बुक्स है ये सैटेनिक बुक्स हैं, वो उसको कंडेम करते थे, जलाते थे। और यहाँ भी जो मुस्लिम आक्रामक थे उन्होंने आकर के पुस्तकें जलाई, हमारी पुस्तकें जलाई थी, और ये चर्च ने भी किया था अपने डोमिनेंस के दिनों में। तो ये सेंचुरीज से हो रहा था और पहली बार किसी पगान ने ये अब्राहमिक रिलीजियस बुक पर, मतलब इस्लाम पर सवाल उठाया था। ये जरूर है कि हाई कोर्ट ने याचिका खारिज कर दी, लेकिन जो सीताराम गोयल ने कहा कि भाई उसने जो मुद्दे उठाए थे वो बने रह गए। और ये इंटरेस्टिंग है, मैं उसकी थोड़ी सी बैकग्राउंड रख दूं आज के श्रोताओं या पाठकों के लिए। वो बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग है, हालांकि जो पुस्तक पढ़ेंगे वो तो इसको जान जाएंगे। उसमें सीताराम गोयल ने इसको एक बहुत इम्पॉर्टेंट टास्क समझ करके इसको रखा। और इंटरेस्टिंग बात यह है कि जब वो पुस्तक तैयार कर रहे थे, उसी समय एक दूसरा मुकदमा भी दिल्ली में आया। वो दूसरी तरह से आया। एक व्यक्ति ने, जो हिंदू महासभा के नेता भी थे, इंद्रसेन शर्मा, उन्होंने एक पोस्टर लगाई जिसमें वो कुरान की 28 या 24 आयतें थी, 24 आयतें थी शायद, और उसको 24 आयतें थी। और उसके अंत में उन्होंने लिखा कि जब तक ये आयतें रहेंगी तब तक समाज में शांति नहीं हो सकती। तो पुलिस ने ठीक उन्हीं धाराओं में उनको अरेस्ट कर लिया जिस धारा में चांदमल चोपड़ा ने बाद में पिटीशन डाली थी कि ये कुरान पर ये धाराएं अट्रैक्ट होती हैं। तो ये इंटरेस्टिंग बात है कि उसी धारा में इंद्रसेन शर्मा को गिरफ्तार किया गया। लेकिन वो 83 की घटना है, इंद्रसेन शर्मा वाली। लेकिन जब तक उसका जजमेंट आया तो वो आया जुलाई 86 में। और ये कलकत्ता कुरान पिटीशन ये दायर हुआ था 29 मार्च 1985, और उसको डिस्पोज ऑफ किया चीफ जस्टिस ने 2 मई को, शायद 2 मई या 12 मई को था। तो इंटरेस्टिंग बात यह है कि ये उस समय अप्रैल मई में दुनिया में और भारत में भी बहुत जबरदस्त हेडलाइन बनी थी और 2 महीने काफी इस पर चर्चा हुई। और ये सबसे बड़ी सफलता थी, सीताराम गोयल कहते हैं कि ये सबसे बड़ी सफलता थी कि इसने उसको फोकस में लाया। ये दुर्भाग्य की बात है कि उसका पॉलिटिसाइजेशन हो गया, हमारे मंत्री एक्टिव हो गए, केंद्रीय मंत्री एक्टिव हो गए। वहाँ ज्योति बसु चीफ मिनिस्टर थे, उन्होंने इस मुकदमे को, इस याचिका को ही कहा कि इट इज ए डेस्पिकेबल एक्ट। फिर केंद्रीय मंत्री अशोक सेन थे, वो तुरंत कलकत्ता पहुंचे और उन्होंने इंस्ट्रक्शन देना शुरू किया कि कैसे इसमें हस्तक्षेप किया जाए। HR भारद्वाज स्टेट मिनिस्टर ऑफ लॉ थे, वो भी एक्टिव हो गए, उन्होंने कहा। फिर पार्लियामेंट में चर्चा हुई तो बलराम झाकड़ ने बहुत नेगेटिव स्टेटमेंट दिया। और फिर ढाका में, रांची में, श्रीनगर में जो होता है, मुसलमानों को एक तरह से शाह मिल गई ये पॉलिटिसाइजेशन से। तो इस पॉलिटिसाइजेशन से वो मुद्दा दब गया। वो आयतों पर चर्चा कम हुई, नहीं के बराबर हुई, लेकिन सीताराम गोयल ने ये पुस्तक लिख करके उस चर्चा को फिर चलाने की कोशिश की। और उन्होंने कहा भी था कि ये हाई कोर्ट ने जरूर इसको खारिज कर दिया है। और इंटरेस्टिंग बात है कि वो जो दिल्ली हाई कोर्ट, दिल्ली में मेट्रोपॉलिटन जज ने जो मजिस्ट्रेट ने जो फैसला दिया, वो दूसरा फैसला था। उसने भी कहा कि भाई ये चूंकि रिलीजियस बुक है इसलिए इस पर तो कुछ नहीं कहा जा सकता, लेकिन जो पुलिस ने आरोप लगाया है उस पर, इंद्रसेन शर्मा पर, वो सही नहीं है, क्योंकि उसने हूबहू या आयतें कोट की और ऑथेंटिक सोर्स से कोट की, सबसे रेपुटेड पब्लिशर की कोट की, और उसके अंत में जो उसने एक लाइन जोड़ी है यह उसकी फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन है। और एक लाइन फिर भी मेट्रोपॉलिटन मजिस्ट्रेट ने जोड़ दिया कि भाई मैंने ध्यान से यह पढ़ लिया है और ये मैं कोट करता हूँ इंद्रसेन शर्मा को कि पवित्र पुस्तक कुरान मजीद के प्रति पूरे सम्मान के साथ उन आयतों का ध्यान पूर्वक अध्ययन दिखाता है कि वे सचमुच हानिकारक हैं और घृणा सिखाती हैं तथा मोहम्मदी लोगों और अन्य समुदायों के बीच विभेद पैदा करती हैं। यह फैसला 31 जुलाई 1986 को आया था। और नोट करने की बात है कि इस फैसले के विरुद्ध कोई अपील नहीं हुई, ना तो मुस्लिम संगठनों ने की, ना सरकार ने की, दिल्ली सरकार ने की। तो मैं ये समझता हूँ कि जो कलकत्ता पिटीशन पर जो सरकार ने पैनिक दिखाया और उसका पॉलिटिसाइजेशन किया, उससे हानि हुई। उससे ज़्यादा ये उपद्रव हुए, छोटे मोटे दंगे हुए, जैसा मैंने कहा श्रीनगर में, ढाका में पुलिस को गोली चलानी पड़ी, 1 लोग मरे भी, प्रेस में काफ़ी इसकी चर्चा हुई, लेकिन पॉलिटिकल की। हाई कोर्ट ने जो जजमेंट दिया उसका मुख्य बात यह था कि नहीं, इस पर तो हमको चर्चा ही नहीं करनी चाहिए। तो एनीवे मुझे यह लगता है कि ये सबसे महत्वपूर्ण बात यह हुई कि ये पिटीशन एक अभूतपूर्व घटना थी दुनिया में भी, पूरी दुनिया में। और सीताराम गोयल ने कहा था कि इस विषय पर जो सार्वजनिक विमर्श है उसको बढ़ाना चाहिए, क्योंकि ऐसे भी जो मुद्दे चांदमल चोपड़ा ने उठाए थे जितनी मेहनत से, उसको कोई कोर्ट तय नहीं कर सकता है, क्योंकि वो सिविलाइजेशनल मामला है, फिलोसफिकल मामला है, आध्यात्मिक मामला है, स्पिरिचुअल मामला है। उसको समाज ही तय कर सकता है और वो समाज को वो डिस्कशन करना चाहिए था। दुर्भाग्य की बात है कि वो रुक गया। और मैं समझता हूँ कि आज 22 वर्ष के बाद, 22 वर्ष या शायद ज़्यादा, पहली बार 86 में किताब आई थी, 14 और ये 21, 35 सालों के बाद ये वासिम रिजवी ने इसको फिर से उठाया और अब अपने जयपुर डायलॉग ने उठाया। तो कायदे से इस विमर्श को बढ़ाना चाहिए। यही सीताराम गोयल के इस इतने मेहनत से लिखे गए इंट्रोडक्शन का अर्थ है, ऐसा मुझे लगता है।
जी, let us discuss some parts of this very, very voluminous introduction that Sitaram Goyalji penned. Koenraad, the most important, or rather the first important chapter in this is the 3rd chapter. It says the entire Qur'an is a manual on jihad. Now we find that there is often this defense mounted by the apologists of jihad, and they say that, okay, the jihad is of 2 types, the jihad al-akbar and the jihad al-asghar, the lesser jihad and the greater jihad. But Sitaramji, after studying all the hadiths and the tafsirs and also the biography written by Ibn Ishaq, of course, it has various permutations and combinations. It is actually backdated. And then he comes to the conclusion that there are only 4 kinds of jihad. And that he groups them as the jihad bil nafs, that is the jihad by heart, then the jihad bil lasan, that is the jihad by the tongue, that is by preaching, what these tablighis and company, these people do. And the third is jihad bil qalam. Qalam is by pen. So you write and you propagate, and all these tele-evangelists, what they're doing is a combination of jihad bin lasan and jihad bil qalam. And of course, then you have what is called the jihad bil saf, jihad by the sword. So these are the 4 kinds of jihad that he lists out, and he says that this proves that unmistakably the entire Holy Qur'an is actually a manual on jihad. How do you reconcile these 2 positions? One which is taken by Sitaram Goelji, and the other which the apologists of Islam take.
Yes, well, the Islamic position is not necessarily a purely apologetic ploy. Usually they believe that. Modern day Muslims generally genuinely believe that since the beginning, jihad was conceived as mostly a struggle against evil in oneself, and only secondarily, only in a minor sense, also as an armed struggle against the unbelievers. And then some also believe that if a struggle against the unbelievers, it must be a defensive struggle. Now, that is a case of an invented tradition. In my debates with Hindus, I've often brought up the tendency, which is universal, which you find in every religion, to invent traditions and then extrapolate them back into the past. You see, in India, there are traditions concerning the Vedas that Hindus believe are Vedic doctrines, and in fact, they've been invented long after the Vedas were completed. Like, for instance, the idea that they were revealed, just like the Qur'an. You see, the Vedas never say that. All the Vedic verses are in
that's said by Arya Samaj.
entirely to the point, you will see. So the Vedas are entirely in the form of men addressing the gods. You know, the very first hymn of the Vedas starts with Om Agnim Ile, meaning I worship the fire. So Agni, the fire god, is the object of worship. The subject is me, is a human being. And all the verses are like that. This is just the opposite of the Quran, where it is God addressing the human beings through Muhammad. So to say that about the Vedas is an invented tradition, is post-Vedic. And yet everybody reads the Veda through the lens of that later doctrine. Now, similarly,
not me,
in the doctrine of jihad as laid down in the Quran and as exemplified by Muhammad himself in his own life, there is no notion of a greater jihad being something spiritual, something moral, the fight against evil or against ignorance or what. That's not there at all. You see, when Muhammad organizes raids on caravans, he calls it jihad fi sabilillah, jihad, or effort on the road of God. So what he does if he wins is to use the proceeds of his victory to buy arms and horses, which means to amplify his jihad, to make himself stronger, to take on even bigger enemies in the future. So what he's thinking of is pure strategy, is pure physical warfare. So that's what jihad is. Later on, the term jihad was used metaphorically, just as we can use the word struggle or war metaphorically. I struggle against the evil in myself. Okay. Or, we have to have a struggle against the communists, against whoever the bad guys are. Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to put them to the sword, but this is used metaphorically. And so if you have a spiritual struggle, you can do that. You can call it a struggle. You can call it a war. Many traditions have done that. And so Muslims can call it a jihad. So that metaphorical meaning, which was, popularized by the Sufis, is really there, really exists. And most Muslims take it seriously. Nevertheless, it's not the original meaning. And so at the time of Muhammad, it was not there. At the time of Muhammad, jihad meant physical jihad. And so you see jihad with the tongue and jihad with the pen, that's nice, but they come later. The basic jihad means a physical jihad.
Okay, but I have to, I have to disagree with you on the Sufi interpretation, because the Sufis themselves, the great books of the Sufis in India, the greatest books.
Yes, I know that. You see here, what I just said might give rise to the impression that the Sufis were the good guys and that they were peaceful, and that they even managed to turn a warlike concept like jihad into something peaceful and spiritual. Well, that's not exactly the role of the Sufis in India. And there are Islamic scriptures like the one describing the Islamization of Gilgit and Baltistan by this Iraqi Sufi.
Shah Hamadan.
Yes, exactly. And so it says very explicitly, okay, and on this day I went there, and you see us, the Darwishes and Sufis, we destroyed 20 temples. So, they make no pretense of it. It's not like since the 20th century there is this story strongly fostered by Western romantics that Sufism meant something peaceful and so on. That's not exactly true. When Sufism was mystical, was non-warlike, long ago, then it was seen for what it was by the Muslims, and it was persecuted. And so we have Mansour in Iraq, who I think in 922 was beheaded because he said, Ana al-Haq, which means right. I am the truth, Aham Brahmasmi. You see, there's an Upanishadic insight. There he was being spiritual. He was saying the divine is in all of us. Okay, now for that, he was sentenced to death. So, if you think that that is Sufism, well, then Sufism is far, far, far from orthodox. But by the time Sufism reached India, it was simply, a popular form of expressing Islam, which was indeed more congenial to people's religious feelings. For example, you have the use of music in Sufism, like Pakistani Qawwali. And so that resonated with people. They liked that. In fact, myself, I like Qawwali music. However, no matter if the lyrics are Islamic, the very fact that it is music is already non-Islamic. You see, Muhammad, probably because of some neurological ailment, couldn't stand the sound of music. He closed his ears for it. And therefore, since the basis of Islamic law is the imitation of Muhammad, therefore Islam is against music. You see, the Ayatollah Khomeini prohibited music on Iranian radio. The Taliban, the ISIS, and so on, that's one of the first things they do, is to chase music from the airwaves. So, you see, in that sense, the Sufis made a big compromise with people's natural religiosity. Nevertheless, they were Islamic enough to support the Islamic jihad in the physical sense. Prime example is the Ajmer Sufi, Muinuddin Chishti, who prepared and who acted as a spy to prepare for the invasion by Muhammad Ghori, who was the worst Islamic invader in Indian history, the one who brought Islam from the borderlands of India really to the heartland, who he and his men conquered the whole Ganga basin, destroyed the Buddhist universities, destroyed all the temples in Kashi, probably also did one of the destructions of the Babri, not the Babri Masjid, of course, but of the Ram Janmabhoomi temple, even, you know, centuries before Babar. So of course, you see, the Sufis were hand in glove. Maybe they didn't wield the sword themselves, but they had a function in the military operations against infidelism. So I certainly did not want to confirm the impression of New Age people and of Islamic slick propagandists that the Sufis were any better in this regard. No. So military jihad is very much a core part of Islam.
Thank you for agreeing with me. Actually, I have written a very medium-sized paper on this, and I've traced this entire theology, where it changed. And when it came to India, then the tariqat, as the Sufism used to be called at that time, because they formed themselves into tariqas. So the tariqat was completely subordinated to Shariat by the time it entered India. So that's what we have. And as you rightly said, that there used to be a time when tariqat and Shariat used to be quite different. And it was during that Mutazalli and Ash'ari struggle. And in its aftermath, everything changed. And this came to be, the Sufism was voluntarily subordinated to the conservatives by the great Al-Ghazali, if you remember. So that he actually gave primacy to the Shariat. And ever since then, they have very willingly subordinated themselves to the ulama. Even the great Nizamuddin Awliya would actually accept the authority of the ulama. So that's been the situation. And it's all been codified in the great treatise of the Muhammadan law, the Fatawa Alamgiri. That is now more than 300 years old, 325 years. And we have taken up a project to translate it, because no translations are available otherwise, except for small books of that particular booklet. That is the Sufi law. That is the Muhammadan law in India. Anyway, let me go to Shankar Sharan ji. Shankar Sharan ji, जैसा अभी कहा कॉनराड ने, कि ये जो अंतर बताया जाता है जिहाद अकबर और जिहादुल असगर में, असगर मतलब छोटा और अकबर माने बड़ा, तो ये एक पूरी तरह से ऐसा लगता है कि एक प्रवंचना सी लगती है। आप क्या सोचते हैं?
हाँ बिल्कुल, मुझे लगता है कि ये सारी प्रवंचना भी जो है ना, ये पिछले 150 साल की बात है। जब इस्लाम का तीनों साम्राज्य गिर गया और ये आधुनिक युग में लोकतंत्र और डेमोक्रेसी, फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन, चर्च का डोमिनेंस खत्म होने के बाद यूरोप में ये रैशनलिज्म आया, तो वो जो पारंपरिक सदियों से जो ऑर्थोडॉक्स उलेमा जिस तरह से इंटरप्रेट करते थे, वो एग्जैक्टली वही है जो आपने कहा और जो अभी कोनराड ने कहा कि वो जो तलवार वाला जिहाद है वही जिहाद है। वही व्याख्या सदियों से चलती रही थी। ये 150 सालों से हुआ है। और मजे की बात है कि इस तरह की व्याख्या ज़्यादातर लिबरल क्रिश्चियनों ने, लेफ्टिस्टों ने, गांधीयंस ने और जो हमारे यहाँ जो सेकुलर लोग हैं, इन लोगों ने ज़्यादा दी है उनके सपोर्ट में। लेकिन अगर फाउंडेशनल टेक्स्ट देखें, कुरान और हदीस, तो ये इसका एक प्रमाणिक उत्तर डॉक्टर बिल वार्नर ने पेश किया है अपने मेथड से। वो मैथमेटिशियन है, तो उन्होंने मैथमेटिकल मेथड लगा करके इसका जवाब दिया है। उन्होंने कहा कि ये जो कुरान में 111 आयतें जिहाद पर है, सीरा में 67% सामग्री जिहाद पर है, और ये प्रॉफेट मोहम्मद की जीवनी में लगभग 75% उनकी एक्टिविटी जिहाद पर है। सही बुखारी में 21% जिहाद पर है। और उन्होंने बाकायदा ये जो हदीसें हैं उनको गिन करके बताया कि लगभग 7,000 हदीसों में 1500 हदीस जिहाद पर है। और वार्नर कहते हैं कि 1400 हदीसें काफिरों को मार डालने वाले अर्थ में है, सीधे सीधे। केवल कुछ ही अन्य अर्थ में है जिसको वो गोल मोल अर्थ दिया जाता है, वही बड़ा जिहाद, अपने चरित्र का उत्थान करना वगैरह वगैरह। लेकिन कुरान में एक भी ऐसी आयत नहीं है जो जिहाद का ये अर्थ बताती है, जीरो। और ये मारना और मरना, और जो कुरान की टर्मिनोलॉजी है स्ले एंड बी स्लेन, जो कुरान में है 9.111 में, वही अर्थ कुरान में सब जगह छाया हुआ है। तो ये भारत की स्थिति है, जो चूंकि यहाँ पर यह ज्ञान परंपरा का देश है, योगी लोग रहे हैं, मुझे तो लगता है कि इन्हीं की नकल में सूफियों को यहाँ ज़्यादा स्थापित किया गया, क्योंकि यहाँ के योगियों, साधुओं, संतों और मंदिरों का वो लोग जवाब नहीं दे सकते थे, और इसलिए उन्होंने अडॉप्ट किया। जो ये कलकत्ता कुरान पिटीशन की एक प्रीफेस में लिखते हैं सीताराम गोयल लास्ट में कि भारत इस्लाम के लिए सबसे कठिन जगह रही है। और उसका कारण यह है कि भारत के प्रति और हिंदुओं के प्रति जो इस्लामियों में घृणा है, उसका कारण यह है कि इंडिया हैज बीन देयर बिगेस्ट फेल्योर। एक भी चीज नहीं है जो उनकी यहाँ टिक पाई। तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि यहाँ की परंपरा का कुछ दुरुपयोग करके भी उन्होंने वो रहस्यवाद भरने की कोशिश की जो अरब में नहीं है। इस तरह की चीजें अरब में नहीं मिलेंगी, या नॉन इंडियन इस्लामिस्टों के बीच इस तरह की नहीं मिलेंगी। भारत में इसलिए है कि एक तो उनको गांधीयंस ने और सेकुलरिस्टों ने इस तरह की चीजों को बना करके पेश किया। जैसे गांधी जी ने कुछ मुहावरे दे दिए, कुछ लेफ्टिस्टों ने मुहावरे दे दिए, कुछ नेहरूवादियों ने मुहावरे दे दिए, और अब तो राष्ट्रवादी लोग भी मुहावरा दे रहे हैं कि उनके बिना हमारा भारत अधूरा है वगैरह वगैरह। तो इस तरह की चीजें उनको यहाँ अपने आप भी कुछ मिल गई हैं। लेकिन अगर हम ओरिजिनल सोर्स में जाएं, जो कोनराड भी कह रहे हैं कि अगर कुरान, हदीस और सीरा को देखें तो उसमें जिहाद का वो अर्थ कहीं नहीं है, आध्यात्मिक उत्थान वगैरह, बल्कि आध्यात्मिक चीज तो कुरान में खोजने से नहीं मिलती है। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये जिहाद का ये जो गोल मोल अर्थ है, ये पिछले 100 सालों में चूंकि इस्लाम कोप अप नहीं कर रहा है मिलिटरली, अब वो उस तरह से जबरदस्ती नहीं कर सकता है जो गूरी ने किया, जो अकबर ने किया, जो बाबर ने किया, जो उधर टर्की वगैरह में जो जिन लोग खलीफाओं ने किया। तो अब वो नए समय में वो इसको गोल मोल पेश करके इसको एक ऐसी व्याख्या दे रहे हैं जो बहुत आउटरेजियस है। वो यहाँ तक कहते हैं कि गुलामी इस्लाम ने ही खत्म की, स्त्रियों की समानता इस्लाम नहीं दी, इस्लाम से ज़्यादा तो बराबरी कहीं नहीं है। तो ये सब एपोलॉजेटिक जो है, ये हाल की चीज़ है, नकली चीज़ है और तकिया का अंश है। मुझे तो यही लगता है, क्योंकि फाउंडेशनल टेक्स्ट में जिहाद का कोई और अन्य अर्थ नहीं मिलता। यहाँ तक कि आज भी जो इस्लामिक कंट्री हैं, सऊदी अरब या ईरान, वहाँ कोई मुल्ला, कोई इमाम आयतुल्लाह जिहाद का ये अर्थ नहीं बोलता है। मैं चैलेंज करता हूँ। और आज भी वो जो अर्थ बताते हैं वो एग्जैक्टली वही है।
आप बिल्कुल सही कहते हैं, क्योंकि यदि इसका अर्थ देखने जाएं तो हमें ये जो इसका अर्थ जो है, हम इसका गांधी से और विनोबा भावे से नहीं ले सकते उसको, तो हमें उनकी तफसीर से ही लेना पड़ेगा, जो मानक तफसीर है, क्योंकि वहाँ वैसे भी तकलीद का सिद्धांत है और जो आलिम उलमा कहते हैं वही मानक है और उसी को सही माना जाता है। और जहाँ तक आप कह रहे हैं कि यहाँ पर उनको बहुत सफलता नहीं मिली जिस प्रकार से उन्होंने एक तरह से एक झटके में पूरा मेसोपोटामिया, पूरा आपका जिसको कहते हैं लेवां और पूरा अफगानिस्तान इत्यादि सब जीत लिया था, तभी वो हाली बोलता है ना, वो हाली का एक प्रसिद्ध नज़म है कि वो दीने हिजाजी का बेबाक बेड़ा निशा जिसका अक्साए आलम में पहुंचा, मजाहम हुआ कोई खतरा न जिसका, न अम्मा में ठिठका न कुलजम में झिझका, किए पै सिपर जिसने सातों समंदर, वो डूबा दहाने में गंगा के आकर। तो ये जो है, ये जो एक सेंस है, इसीलिए आप कह रहे हैं, बिल्कुल सही कह रहे हैं कि वो जो एक यहाँ का जो आलिम उलमा जो तबका है, जो अशराफ तबका है, उसमें इतनी घृणा भरी हुई है अंदर, जिसको वो छुपा के और अलग अलग तरीकों से व्यक्त करता है, उसका यही कारण है ये जो हाली बोल रहा है बिल्कुल साफ शब्दों में। Let me go back to Koenraad. So, Koenraad, there's something in this introduction that is even more interesting. You already referred to it. We've already talked about the orthodox exposition of jihad, and also briefly talked about the jihad in India's history, which is chapter 5 and 6 of this book. Doctrine of the Islamic State also we briefly discussed. This is the 7th chapter in this book. The 8th chapter is very interesting. The 8th chapter is Muslim Ummah is a military machine. We would like to know your thoughts on that chapter.
Right. Let me first say something about Chanmal Chopra's original intention, which was to show precisely that there is the germ of a military machine in the Quran. And this differs, that idea has become rather common among Hindus lately, mainly because of this book. But you see, this sharply differs from a recent attempt, and some people might have thought that very similar, by a Shiite leader to approach court to prohibit also a number of violent verses from the Quran. So he didn't demand a ban on the Quran as such, but a ban on those verses, scrapping them from the Quran. Now, his idea was precisely to whitewash the Quran. You see, his idea is that no, the Quran is not violent. The Quran does not teach military jihad. And those verses have been interpolated into it. It's like Hindus say that in the Ramayana, the Shambhuka episode, which doesn't, flatter Rama very much, has been interpolated later, and this is probably also true. However, you see, to say that about these very central verses of the Quran is quite absurd, and in fact they are entirely integral to it, and they are completely in consonance with every other verse in the Quran and with the practice of Muhammad's life as expounded in the Sirah, that is the biography, and in the Hadith collections. So the judge, rejected that attempt on the flimsy ground that it was wasting his time. It was a frivolous petition that therefore he didn't want to entertain it. No, I think he meant it, and many Muslims, and especially pro-Muslim non-Muslims, like Karen Armstrong, for instance, the writer on religion, who want these verses not to be Islamic, who feel embarrassed when you or me say, hey, what about these verses? They are in the Quran. Don't you see they're problematic? So they would prefer that no one sees these verses. And so if people do look into the Quran, well, then preferably make them believe that these verses have been interpolated, that they're not really Quranic. Now, of course, the reality is, yes, they are part of the Quran. And so, you see, the Quran sends the Muslims on a mission, which is, and it says so very explicitly in the Quran, to make the entire world worship Allah alone. You see, in the case of Hitler's Mein Kampf, it has been said later in Hollywood and so on, that it contained an intention to conquer the world. Well, that's not true. Even Hitler did not aim that high. However, yet Muhammad did. You see, Muhammad says very explicitly, I want the whole world to worship Allah. When, and this is in another chapter of this introduction, as Goal explains, when Muhammad says Allah, he usually means Muhammad. Like, for example, this is an example he develops in detail. The morning before the Battle of Badr, you see, he sends a prayer to the Lord, and in it he muses that if we perish, if we lose this battle, then you, Allah, you will not be worshipped anymore. Now, you see, either Allah means something great and big, means God, like many people say, oh, whether you say God or, you know, the great Manitou, as the Native Americans say, or you say Shiva or so, it's all the same. Some people say that. Well, you see, if that is what is meant, then obviously, you know, no matter who won or lost the Battle of Badr, God was going to go on being worshipped in some name or another. And so people have been doing this all the time. They didn't need Muhammad for that, or his army at Badr. And the Arabs worshipped Allah already for a long time. The father of Muhammad was called Abdallah, the servant of Allah. But then Allah meant, you know, it was an honorific reference to the god Hubal, the main god of the Kaaba in Mecca. So the Meccans already refer to Hubal, who is a sort of similar figure to Shiva. He's a masculine moon god. So they already refer to him as Allah. So again, you see, Allah didn't need Muhammad. Allah was already there before Muhammad. He's going to be around after Muhammad, and even after the religion of Muhammad has disappeared. So what in fact Muhammad means is not you, Allah, were not worshipped before we started. Not you, Allah, will no longer be worshipped if we disappear. No, what he meant was nobody was was venerating Muhammad before I came on the scene. Nobody will keep on venerating Muhammad if my followers lose. So the central part of Islam is not Allah, but is Muhammad. And that's the defining part. You see, Allah in some name or other, in some form or other, is worshipped everywhere. Whereas the defining element of Islam is the person of Muhammad. That's the only original thing in Islam. All the customs and so on existed before. Even this monotheistic belief was borrowed from the Jews. You know, congregational worship was borrowed from the Christians. The 5 times prayer every day was borrowed from the Zoroastrians. The pilgrimage to Mecca was borrowed from the pagans of Arabia, who had already practiced it for centuries, and so on. So there is nothing at all original in Islam except the person of Muhammad, and that's the central part. That's what concerned Muhammad. That's what he cared about, namely keep keep venerating me. That's the central part. And so in order to achieve that, you see, that's not a natural thing you can achieve. When Alexander the Great was conquering the world, he made it a point to go worship in every major temple of the peoples he conquered. When he conquered Egypt, you know, he took a great risk, you see, traveling in the desert, going to some particular place of pilgrimage to address the local gods. You see, he didn't know those gods. He hadn't grown up worshipping them. Nevertheless, he recognized the same religious urge in other peoples. So if you want to recognize Allah in Shiva and in Osiris and in Jupiter and so on, then you will recognize him everywhere. By contrast, if you care about Muhammad, well, Muhammad is just an individual. I mean, there are so many individuals that you don't know. You only hear about them if somebody comes to tell you about them. So as long as there is no Islamic preaching, you're never going to hear about Muhammad. And so therefore it is necessary to spread his message in force, to make people believe in Muhammad, to force them to recognize Muhammad, and then to spread it ever farther. Today is one of the periods of great expansion of Islam in places where there was no Islam ever before. You see, inside Northern Europe, you see, inside America, inside the farthest reaches in Africa. And so that's part of the Islamic mission. That's a mission he gave to his fellow Muslims, that do spread Islam until everybody is a Muslim.
Oh yes, that is very much there, and that's what probably makes Islam a military machine. I have this request to the people who are watching, and I find nearly 1,000 people are watching. Last time you didn't ask any questions. So there are only two ways. There are only two situations in which you don't ask questions. One is that you understood everything, and the other is you haven't understood anything. The kind of enlightened watchers we have in Jaipur Dialogues, I'm quite sure that that's not the two situations that you are under. So please do ask questions, because we have such intellectuals coming to Jaipur Dialogues, and you don't ask questions, that I am disappointed, and I'm sure they are also disappointed. So please do ask questions. Okay. So I think this persona of Muhammad is something that probably galvanizes the entire Islamic machinery into a military machine. Is that what your contention is, Koenraad?
Spread Islam requires a military effort, because, as Muhammad soon found out, not everybody is appreciative of this message. You see, worshipping Allah, that's fine. You see, whatever name you give to Allah. But you see, recognizing Muhammad as the final spokesman of Allah, that's a different matter. And so even within his own family, he found his first followers, his wife and his nephew, Ali. But he also found the first skeptics. You see, his foster father rejected Islam until his deathbed. In fact, even on his deathbed, he proposed a compromise, because he was seeing that Muhammad was creating trouble all the time. And so he said, okay, you see, why don't we stop this trouble? Why don't we reconcile? And why don't we practice tolerance? So to you, your religion, to me, my religion. And Muhammad rejected that.
Yes, that's the interesting part. And that's often used as an apology.
Already in Mecca, in his hometown, that not everybody was going to be accepting of this. Then he got his chance in Medina, and there you already get a military context. He has to reconcile two warring tribes. Then he has to establish himself there, because the goodwill generated by his success in effectively reconciling these tribes, that was not going to last forever. So he needed an economic basis, and having been a caravan rider himself, he knew all the caravan routes, and so he created that by attacking caravans and plundering them and taking hostages that he could sell for ransom. And you see there already, it was not always with gentle means. Of course, there was a struggle, an armed struggle necessary in order to capture these caravans. Then you see, to guard the prisoners in expectation of the ransom, he was asked by his men, well, we have taken these women captive, and now we have to wait for a few weeks until the family back in Mecca can send ransom to us. You don't expect us, normal, healthy men, to sit around and watch these beautiful women. We want to have our way with them. And so Muhammad is a bit in doubt, but then he decides, well, yes, you can go and rape them, because you see, as a robber chieftain, he had, of course, his pride, his code of conduct, so to speak. And so, if you're an abductor and you want money in exchange for the goods that you've stolen, you are going to return the goods in the original condition. You are not going to return damaged goods. Okay? So if these women are not pregnant and you return them pregnant by one of these Islamic raiders, that's not good enough for a really self-respecting robber chieftain. So you see, Muhammad does not want to return them pregnant. However, there is an answer to this problem, namely taqdeer, fatalism. You see, it's the will of God. Everything is the will of Allah. So if Allah doesn't want her to get pregnant, she won't get pregnant. You see? Okay. Therefore, he says to his men, well, go ahead and rape them. So, anyway, those are the slightly violent methods he normalized. And so, doing battle was effectively part of it, because the Meccans didn't take it lying down. So they sent escorts. And so there was the Battle of Badr. This was successful for the Muslims. Then there was the Battle of Uhud, which was not so successful. But so at any rate, he got used to this military life. And so very soon, he became the most powerful man in Arabia, militarily speaking. And so more and more tribes walked over to his side, simply out of self-interest. They wanted to be on the winning side. And of course, that they didn't mean it was proven at the time when Muhammad died, because immediately most of them returned to paganism. The first caliph, the first successor of Muhammad, Abu Bakr, had as his main job to force the Arabs back into Islam, to fight these what was called the murtadin, the returners, those who returned to their original faith away from Islam. He forced them back into Islam. So you see, originally, it was purely a military show of force that made Muhammad successful in Arabia. And then it was extra force, more force by the caliphs, that made his victory permanent, that made Islam a permanent presence, which then went on expanding very fast all the way to Spain and France, all the way to India, to Transoxania, and so on. But so you see, this military operation was already started in Muhammad's life. It's not the case as many soft heads and soft brains and new agers and so on will say. Oh, but the followers had all misunderstood. You see, the prophet, he had seen it. He was peaceful. He was spiritual. The others misunderstood. No, 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 no. Muhammad started it himself. Like, for example, you've asked about the small jihad and the great jihad. Now, the great jihad, that term is also used for a military jihad. Namely, you see, the jihads against all these small tribes in Arabia, those were small jihads. There were only a few hundred people involved. Whereas, you see, to take on the might of the Byzantine Empire, that promised to be a great jihad. And so Muhammad himself already did the first attempt, did already a first invasion into Byzantine territory. It was not successful, and he didn't live long enough anymore to organize it on a larger scale. It would be the second Caliph, Omar, who would do this. But so the intention of spreading violently by military means, that was already present in Muhammad. And so in that sense, the ummah, to the extent that it follows Muhammad, is a military machine by definition until the whole world has become Muslim.
Oh, yes, the violent intent is very clear in the way he killed he had his critics killed, like Asma bint Marwan, Abu Afaq, and Ka'b bin Ashraf. The Asad Owaisi was actually talking about Ka'b bin Ashraf the other day. Anyway, now I'll come to Shankar Sharan ji to ask the concluding question. अंत में शंकर शरण जी, मैं ये चाहूँगा कि आप इस पूरी जो ये चर्चा है और सीताराम गोयल जी का जो ये अप्रतिम प्रयास है, इसका पूरा एक सार हमें बताएं, जिसके बाद फिर हम प्रश्नों पर चलेंगे। अब कई प्रश्न हमारे पास आ गए।
ओके, देखिए, मुझे ये लगता है कि इनकी पुस्तक में जो ये दूसरा और तीसरा अध्याय है वो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है, क्योंकि उसी से वो प्रेरित होकर के वो लिखा गया था। द जजमेंट मिसेस द मेन पॉइंट एंड द एंटायर कुरान इज मैनुअल ऑन जिहाद। तो सीताराम गोयल ने उस जो चीफ जस्टिस ने जो जजमेंट दिया था उसको वो थॉरली उसको क्रिटिसाइज करते हैं, और उसी में ये एक बल्क ऑफ इंट्रोडक्शन तैयार हुआ है। वो कहते हैं कि ये बसाक साहब ने जो जजमेंट दिया है वो ये कहा है कि भाई चूंकि ये दैवी किताब है इसलिए ये बुरी हो ही नहीं सकती है। और वो कहते हैं कि मिसेस द पॉइंट यही है कि हुजूर, आपसे तो यही कहा गया था कि ये सब आयतें हैं 85 तीन कैटेगरी में, जो हिमांशु शेखर चक्रवर्ती और चांदमल चोपड़ा दोनों ने मिल करके बनाई थी। कहा कि आपसे तो ये इल्तिजा की गई थी कि आप ये मिला करके देखें कि ये ऐसा करती है या नहीं करती है, और ये इस्लामिक हिस्ट्री और मुस्लिम बिहेवियर पैटर्न उसके अनुरूप है या नहीं है। इन अदर वर्ड्स, कुरान के कारण ये अशांति होती है या नहीं होती है। आपने इस सवाल को ही डिस्कस नहीं किया और ये जजमेंट दे दिया कि चूंकि, जिसको कहते हैं ना कि वो लॉजिकल फैलेसी, कि जो चीज़ आपको प्रूव करनी है वो आपने पहले ही मान ली, कि आपको तो यही दिखाना था। अगर आप कॉन्ट्रेरी जजमेंट देना चाहते थे, अगर आप पिटीशन एक्सेप्ट नहीं करना चाहते थे, तो आपको यह प्रूव करना होता कि हाँ, ये सब आयतें हमने पढ़ ली, जो कि वो दिल्ली वाले मेट्रोपॉलिटन मजिस्ट्रेट ने किया, कि हमने ये पढ़ ली और हमने पाया कि नहीं, इससे कोई अशांति नहीं होती है, कोई घृणा नहीं फैलाती है, इससे कोई समाज में इसका बुरा प्रभाव नहीं पड़ता, और ये उन आर्टिकल्स को 395 और 295A और 3 समथिंग A को अट्रैक्ट नहीं करती हैं। आपको ये दिखाना था, लेकिन आपने ये नहीं किया। और तब सीताराम गोयल ने वो एंटायर कुरान इज ए मैनुअल ऑफ जिहाद, और फिर उन्होंने, ये भी एक महत्वपूर्ण हिस्सा है, जिहाद इन इंडिया हिस्ट्री, ये दोनों मिला करके उन्होंने थ्योरी ऑफ जिहाद और प्रैक्टिस ऑफ जिहाद, ये मिला करके ये साबित किया इस पुस्तक में कि जो कंप्लेन की गई थी वो कंप्लेंट 100% सही है, आपने इसको डिसमिस कर दिया, कोई बात नहीं। लेकिन उसके बाद जो कंक्लूड करते हैं सीताराम गोयल, और मुझे लगता है कि उसी को ध्यान रखना चाहिए कि ठीक है कि कोर्ट की सीमा है, एक तो ये लॉ अंग्रेजों ने बनाया था, कुछ मुसलमान इस्लामी शासकों ने बनाया था, वो उन्होंने अपने इंटरेस्ट में बनाया था, तो एक तो उससे हम बंधे हुए हैं, वही ज़्यादातर कानून अभी भी चल रहे हैं। दूसरा ये कि मोरल और स्पिरिचुअल मामलों में फैसला देने के लिए कोर्ट कोई फोरम नहीं है। इसके लिए उन्होंने सार्वजनिक विमर्श बढ़ाने का आह्वान किया था, और यही उनके वर्ड है, मैं उनको कोट करता हूँ सीताराम गोयल को, कोई कोर्ट काफिरों का यह जानने का अधिकार नहीं छीन सकती कि कुरान ने उनके लिए क्या क्या कहा है, अपने अनुयायियों को गैर मुसलमानों के साथ क्या क्या दुर्व्यवहार करने की अनुशंसा की है। तो हमारे लोगों को, ये सीताराम गोयल कहते हैं, मैं समझता हूँ कि यही इसका कंक्लूजन है जो शुरू में ही है उनके प्रीफेस में। हमारे लोगों को, मतलब हिंदुओं को यह जानने का अधिकार है कि मामला क्या था, क्योंकि जैसा मैंने हिंट किया कि पॉलिटिसाइजेशन के कारण चूंकि हमारे सारे लीडर एक्टिव हो गए, सेंट्रल मिनिस्टर्स और चीफ मिनिस्टर, और फिर इनके क्यू पर पाकिस्तान के राष्ट्रपति ने भी बयान दिया, वहाँ के मिनिस्टर ने बयान दिया, ढाका में प्रदर्शन हुए, तो इस पॉलिटिसाइजेशन में ये चीज़ डूब गई कि पिटीशन क्या था और उसका कंटेंट क्या था। तो सीताराम गोयल उसी को रीइम्फेसाइज करना चाहते हैं कि उसको सामने लाइए कि और वो कहते हैं कि हमारे लोगों को ये जानने का अधिकार है कि मामला क्या था। केवल अच्छी तरह पूरी जानकारी रखने वाला जो जनमत है, पब्लिक है, वही तय कर सकता है कि कोई पुस्तक, इन दिस केस कुरान, विवेक, नैतिकता और आध्यात्मिकता से रिलीजियस कहलाने की अधिकारी है या नहीं है। और इसी लक्ष्य से हमने यह पूरी याचिका और अन्य कागजात प्रकाशित करने का निश्चय किया, ये सीताराम गोयल कहते हैं प्रीफेस में। और जैसा अभी पिछला जो 10 मिनट में ये कोनराड ने जितनी ब्रिलियंटली उस बात को रखा कि पूरे इस्लाम का जो इसेंस है वो मोहम्मद है और मोहम्मडनिज्म है, और मोहम्मद से ही ये इस्लाम शुरू होता है, उनके साथ ही ये ख़त्म होता है। तो इस चीज़ को सामने लाना और यह अल्लाह और स्पिरिचुअलिज्म के उसको गोल मोल बातों में उसको डुबा देना, इससे ये चीज़ रह गई कि चांदमल चोपड़ा ने कितने क्वालिटेटिव, और ये सीताराम गोयल कहते हैं कि चोपड़ा ने कितना क्वालिटेटिव और डाइवर्स प्रमाण जुटाया था। लोग ये भी नहीं जान पाए कि याचिका क्यों दी गई थी, वो ये भी नहीं जान पाए कि ये क्यों कोर्ट ने इससे कतराने की कोशिश की, यहाँ तक कि याचिका देने वाले को परेशान किया। बल्कि जो पहली जज थी जिसने इसको एडमिट किया था, पद्मा दस्तगीर, उस पर इतना प्रेशर दिया गया कि उनको अपने को मामले से हट जाना पड़ा, और तब ये चीफ जस्टिस ने उस पर किया। और फिर सरकार ने, फिर उनकी प्रतिक्रिया ने, विभिन्न दलों ने और लोगों ने जिस तरह से एक्टिविटी की, सीताराम गोयल कहते हैं कि ये बात मिट गई, ध्यान में नहीं आई कि ये सीधे सीधे न्यायिक प्रक्रिया में हस्तक्षेप था। एक तरह से हाई कोर्ट की अवमानना की जा रही थी कि जो मामला सब जुडिस है उस पर आप पहले से ही इतना हंगामा कर रहे हैं और तरह तरह के प्रेशर डाल रहे हैं। और पाकिस्तान से जिस तरह के बयान आए उस पर भारत में किसी ने जवाब नहीं दिया कि वो भारत पर लांछन लगा रहे हैं और जो उनके अधिकार क्षेत्र में नहीं है। तो इसलिए सीताराम गोयल ने जो ये पुस्तक लिखी, ये बड़े गंभीर मकसद से लिखी थी, और इसलिए इसके जितने वो इंट्रोडक्शन वाले जो चैप्टर्स हैं, एक तो उन्होंने फैसले की विस्तृत समीक्षा की, जैसा मैंने कहा कि चैप्टर 2 वही है। फिर चैप्टर 3 जो है उन्होंने कुरान की विस्तृत समीक्षा की, और उन्होंने यह साबित करके दिखाया कि कुरान जिहाद का मैनुअल है। पूरी कुरान जो है वो जिहाद करने की स्ट्रेटजी और टैक्टिक बताती है। और इसमें उन्होंने एक पाकिस्तानी ब्रिगेडियर की फेमस किताब है कुरानिक कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ वार, उसको थॉरोली एनालाइज करते हुए उसी से सारा कोटेशन लेकर के दिखाया कि एक इस्लामी स्कॉलर, और उसकी भूमिका जियाउल हक ने लिखी थी, पाकिस्तानी प्रेसिडेंट ने लिखी थी, एस के मलिक की किताब, उस पूरी किताब का इसेंस उन्होंने कोट किया सीताराम गोयल ने, ये दिखाने के लिए कि किस तरह से कुरान एग्जैक्टली वही करती है जो चोपड़ा ने आरोप लगाया था। और फिर जैसा मैंने कहा कि वो बहुत मूल्यवान चैप्टर है कि भारत में जिहाद का इतिहास उन्होंने दिखाया, और एक नहीं 10 हमलावरों का, मोहम्मद बिन कासिम, सुबुक्तुद्दीन गजनवी, गोरी, अलाउद्दीन खिलजी, तैमूर, बाबर, शेरशाह सूरी, अकबर, अहमद शाह अब्दाली, इन सब का उन्होंने शॉर्ट में प्रेजेंटेशन दिया ओरिजिनल इस्लामिक सोर्सों से कि इन्होंने क्या एग्जैक्टली किया और वो किस तरह से हूबहू मैच करता है कुरान से। फिर वो मोहम्मद पर भी एक छोटा सा चैप्टर देते हैं जो बहुत मूल्यवान है कि उन्होंने वो पैटर्न सेट किया जो अभी कोनराड ने बहुत ही शानदार तरीके से रखा कि वो सब कुछ शुरू किया हुआ प्रॉफेट मोहम्मद का है, जो आज लश्कर तोयबा करता है, इस्लामी स्टेट करता है या बिन लादेन ने किया, एक भी ऐसा काम नहीं है जो प्रॉफेट मोहम्मद के इसमें सुन्ना में नहीं मिलते। फिर सीताराम गोयल इस्लामी स्टेट का सिद्धांत भी देते हैं कि जो कुरान और मोहम्मद ने जो इस्लामी स्टेट का थ्योरी दिया, और ये मुस्लिम उम्मत जो है उनकी सैनिक मशीन है और उनका जो प्रेयर है वो भी एक तरह का वार क्राई है, इनका इवन जो शहादा है वो वार क्राई है। तो यही ये सारी चीज़ों को प्रेजेंट करके सीताराम गोयल कहते हैं कि बावजूद इसके कि पिटीशन डिसमिस हो गया, लेकिन उस पिटीशन ने एक बहुत बड़ा काम किया कि पूरे वर्ल्ड मैप में ये पहली बार ला के रखा कि नहीं, ये चैलेंजेबल है, चैलेंज किया गया और उस पर जो डिस्कशन होनी चाहिए थी वो नहीं हुआ। तो मैं समझता हूँ कि आज आपने और शायद ये पिछले महीने वासिम रिजवी साहब ने एक तरह से उसी को फिर से जगाने का काम किया था। अनफॉर्चुनेटली सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने उस पर एक लाइन भी नहीं लिखा, और ये बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग है कि सीताराम गोयल ने लिखा है कि इसको हाई सुप्रीम कोर्ट ले जाना चाहिए था। आज होते तो पता नहीं उनको वो क्या कहते कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट में जब गई तो ये हो गया।
वैसे मेरा मानना था इसको सीधे सुप्रीम कोर्ट नहीं ले जाना चाहिए था, क्योंकि आर्टिकल 32 का जो जुरिस्डिक्शन है वो बहुत लिमिटेड है। ये अलग बात है कि उन्होंने टेक्निकल इशू पे नहीं लेके और उसको मेरिट पे भी डिस्कस कर लिया, जो भी उनका जुरिस्डिक्शन नहीं था इसमें। एनीवे, वो स्वयं ऑर्डेन्ड प्रीस्ट हैं, यू नो, दैट जज हु हेडेड द बेंच is himself an ordained priest, a Zoroastrian ordained priest. He should have recused himself. He had no business getting into the business of another religion. Anyway, that is another matter. I'll just end this by referring to this logical fallacy that Shankar Sharan ji referred to. According to me, the entire Islamic philosophy is a logical fallacy, because the Prophet is proved by the word of Allah and Allah is proved by the word of the Prophet. So I can't have a better circular reasoning than this. Okay, so that brings this this part of the discussion to conclusion. We'll move to the audience questions next. Now we have plenty of them. I think I've managed to provoke them enough to ask a lot of questions now. And I request all my viewers to please share and like the video. Also press the bell icon. Bless us with your contributions, as you've always been doing. And of course, the reminder, this great work of translating this wonderful Sufi law of Islam in India is on. And we've already identified teams which are started working on this. All we need is that you can go to that crowdfund page and help us with your support. Okay, let's move to the questions and answers. Ganesh Vasudev, what is the end of this? How do we push out Islam? Islam, in fact, is creating lots of problems in the world. All day is Islam ideology. Yeah, Koenraad, that's for you.
Yeah, well, I have to admit that I've only been working all my life on a part of the answer. Part of the answer is simply to have a correct understanding of Islam. You see, that has been sorely lacking in much of the world, but especially in Hindu circles, because Hindus tend to project their own attitude to religion onto Islam. So cheap explanations of the type, yes, Muslims misbehave, but Muhammad, he was great and Islam is a great religion, that finds very many takers among Hindus, like Guru Golwalkar. He said explicitly that Islam was a great religion and Muhammad was a great prophet, but the Muslims are great. Well, I leave it to you to translate. Paji,
Idiots.
So, so you see, this idea is very common, and yet you see it's not true. Muhammad, Muhammad behaved the way he did because he believed that he was serving his interests best that way. What were his interests? Well, he had this strange belief that he was the spokesman of God. Now, if you see how this starts, he had a vision when he was fasting during the month of Ramadan, which was, of course, a pre-Islamic thing, this annual fast. So he was in a cave in the mountains outside Mecca. He was meditating, and then he got this strange hallucination. He saw the archangel Gabriel appear to him, and Gabriel spoke to him. He said, "Ikra, read out." And Muhammad said, "Oh, he's completely flabbergasted. He wonders what's happening." He said, I can't read. Read what, And, Gabriel keeps talking to him, gives him more confidence. Even after disappearing, this Gabriel has not really convinced Muhammad because he himself thinks that he's going crazy, that some evil spirit has taken possession of him. So he wants to commit suicide. And so that's where the history of Islam ended. You see, half an hour after it began, Muhammad walks up to the mountain where there is some steep edge where he can jump off. But then you see, before he jumps, this hallucination reappears. There's Gabriel again. And he tells him, no, wait a minute. You go home, calm down, and you'll see. You see, this is me, Gabriel speaking. And so then he gives it a second chance. Okay, he goes home. And then it's his wife, Khadija, who calms him down. And the way she does so is all described by Ibn Ishaq in the biography. Namely, she invites him to sexual intercourse when the spirit reappears, when Gabriel reappears. And so, in spite of Gabriel looking on, they start having intercourse. Then when they're busy with that, halfway through, she asks him, "Hey, what happened to this archangel we were talking about?" "Oh," says Muhammad, "he disappeared." "Ah," says Khadija, "now that's the proof. You see, if it was an evil spirit, now more than at any other time, he would have stayed around to watch the show. And so if he prudishly withdrew from the scene, it proves that he really is an angel. So you are the spokesman of God." And so this way, she accustoms him to this phenomenon of recurring hallucinations. And so that way, he starts to genuinely believe that he's the elect, the spokesman of God. So from then on, you see, all his actions can be explained from that. As for the ordinary Muslims, well, they do not have that excuse. But you see, most people just believe what they are told by their parents, by the adults around them. It's only a small minority that ends up questioning all this. Moreover, you could use a psychiatric term here. There is, in fact, a psychiatrist in Belgium, Herman Somers, who did write about this, who made an analysis, a psychological analysis of the the case of Muhammad. And so he said, you see, what the people around him did was a well-known psychiatric phenomenon, namely what they call in French folie à deux, which means madness with two. Because you have a very common phenomenon that if someone has a delusion, then the people around him, especially his wife, will start playing along and will ultimately also start believing this delusion. And so what is the ummah? What is the Muslim community? Well, it is effectively 2 billion people who have a folie à deux, who have a delusion with not 2, but 2 billion. You know, they all share Muhammad's delusion of being the spokesman of God. So that's what Islam is. Now, if you really understand this, that makes it a lot easier. You see, there is no, enemy of people who for some reason are pudgy. No, you see, there is a fairly rational phenomenon, namely that people with the weakness that human beings have believe anything they are told. And in this case, they are usually very thoroughly indoctrinated in the Islamic view. And so they start believing that what is originally the delusion of Muhammad. So you see, if you understand that, already things become easier. Then, how to get rid of this problem? Well, if it's a security problem, if it's terrorism and so on, then you have the usual means at your disposal. Then you use military means, the intelligence service and so on. In fact, the last few years, both in India and in Europe, they've become a lot better at preventing terrorist attacks by listening in on them, phone taps and so on. So those means should, of course, all be used. But ultimately, the secret, the solution for the Islamic problem is to help them grow out of Islam. You see, there is no reason why people should continue to entertain these funny beliefs. So let them grow up. You see, mankind at one time, for 100%, believed that the earth was in the center and that the sun was turning around the earth. As you can see every day, you can see the sun rise and move around the earth and go down again, right? And yet at one point, somebody had the insight, no, it's the other way around. And 1 or 2 generations later, everybody had discarded the belief of the earth in the center. And now you see, no amount of propaganda is going to make us return to the belief that the earth is in the center. So you see, at some point, you have to outgrow your little delusions. They are childhood phenomena. They're not to be taken too seriously. I mean, if they lead to violence, that violence is to be taken seriously. But you see, the Islamic beliefs, well, you see, people have entertained all kinds of beliefs throughout history. Nevertheless, they have to be outgrown, you see. So the ultimate solution that I know of is simply to make Muslims outgrow the belief in Islam. To some extent, this is already happening. You see, there is the Pew Research Institute in America. They do very good research into religious sociology. And so one thing they have found after repeated opinion polls in North Africa, they see that generation by generation, the belief in Islam diminishes. The skepticism for Islam increases. So you see, India in this case is probably not going to be the pioneer, because over there in Tunisia, for instance, they are just among Muslims. They have nothing to fear. They have nothing to hate. So they just can evolve. Whereas in India, they are in a constant state of confrontation. And so that unites the Muslims. That makes them firm in their faith. But ultimately, it's going to reach India as well. And so So what we can do as outsiders is to promote this evolution. This is a natural evolution. You know, it happens among Muslims themselves. We can't tell them to do that. Nevertheless, we can make a lot of difference. Like you see, we can highlight the true story in movies, for example, in education. You know, we need a course of comparative religion where there is a sort of rational approach to the world religions. And of course, that's not going to be liked by everyone. But ultimately, you see these modern scientific ideas about the truth of Islam should be spread. In fact, I commend another line of work here, the interviews with Abbas Malhadiyar, who is nowadays the specialist in India of the strictly historical approach to Islam. What
Oh, yes,
Muhammad,
we have. I've
yes,
already done 3 episodes on that.
exactly. So what Sitaram Goel does here is to take the Islamic belief about Muhammad and analyze that. So that's absolutely necessary. What is also useful and may prove extremely useful is the historical reading of the birth of Islam, which is very different. Like, you know, for example, I mean, just to say it in a few sentences, you see, the Islamic belief is that at some point there was a prophet who heard the voice of God. You see, around him grew up a book, the Quran. Around the Quran grew up a community of believers, the ummah, Islam, and that founded an empire, the caliphate. Now, what these people say is precisely the opposite. They say, well, the Arabs served as mercenaries for the warring Persian and Byzantine empires. And often, you see, they were confronting one another on the battlefield. So one day they said, okay, let's start on our own. Let's found our own empire. And then, following the example of the Byzantines, they said, oh, but an empire needs a state religion. Okay, let's brew a religion. And then you see, they saw with the Bible behind Christianity, oh, and a religion needs a book. Okay, let's start the Quran. But on what authority is this book based? It's revealed by God. So somebody received that revelation. That's the prophet. So they invented the prophet. See, so that's an entirely different way of seeing it. That's not how Muslims see it. And so I don't follow this approach entirely. You see, I think some of the things that Muslims say about Muhammad make perfect sense, are coherent, stand up to criticism. So there's more truth in it than those skeptical historians believe. Nevertheless, the skeptical historical approach is also very useful, very good. It's not complete yet. It's evolving, but it's a very, very useful approach. And so it helps break through this hypnotizing effect that Islamic indoctrination has on these 2 billion Muslims.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question. And I think we've already gone into about 1 hour, 20 minutes. So we'll try and keep them brief. Why the judiciary in India reluctant to discuss and dissect the verses of Qur'an and outrightly reject any such plea? Do they lack courage? No. I can answer this in just one sentence. It is the zimmification. That's what prevents them. Next question. Naman to Koenraad Elst ji, Shankar ji. All books by Shri Sitaram Goel ji shall be translated in Hindi and all other regional languages. I was mesmerized reading the last chapter of मैं हिंदू कैसे बना. तो इसका क्या स्टेटस है शंकर शरण जी, हिंदी इत्यादि में इसका अनुवाद?
किसका?
सीताराम गोयल जी की पुस्तकों का.
कोई स्टेटस नहीं है अब तो। वॉइस ऑफ इंडिया जो पहले की चीजें हैं वही वो प्रकाशित कर रही है, कोई नया सपोर्ट नहीं है इसलिए वो कर नहीं पा रहे हैं, कोई उनके पास प्लान नहीं है। अगर कोई सामने आता है, अच्छा अनुवाद होता है तो शायद वो पब्लिश करेंगे, ऐसा मुझे लगता है, मगर उनके पास कोई प्लान नहीं है, कोई की रिसोर्सेज भी नहीं है, सपोर्ट नहीं है।
मुझे कितना दुर्भाग्यपूर्ण है कि
हाँ बिल्कुल
ऐसा
मुझे
अनमोल
तो बल्कि
जिसको
मुझे
कह
तो ये
सकते हैं
लगता है
ट्रेजर, जो है
कि
ट्रेजर ट्रोव, उसको
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल
सपोर्ट नहीं है हिंदू समाज द्वारा, और फिर हम नैरेटिव बनाने की बात करते हैं। दुर्भाग्यपूर्ण। Poet Raghav, Justice Loat's clear-cut judgment. Was there a necessity to file another petition for Janab Wasim Rizvi? Well, it was explained right at the beginning by Koenraad that what Wasim Rizvi did was actually he was trying to remove those verses. What Chandmal Chopra was doing, he was asking for a ban on Qur'an. They're two entirely different approaches. Neeraj Srivastava, neither Muhammad nor Ali. Yeah, Koenraad, you want to say something?
I want to interject that even though formally the petition was aimed at banning the Quran, Sitaram Goel comments that, of course, he's not in favor of book banning. And in fact, what we should do is not to ban the Quran, but to read the Quran so that everybody knows what's really in it. And so that's the practical use of this Quran petition. You know, it very crisply brings together a few problematic verses. The rest, you know, you can find out yourself. But here, at least, you have a summary of the evidence that this book is not so innocent.
Quite
And
right.
so once you know that all these Muslims in their mosques are being indoctrinated in this kind of thinking, then you will understand why you have a communal problem in India.
Yes, and those 26 verses that challenge in the Supreme Court can also be looked at in the same manner. I think that should be the right approach. Next. Jain Richarasya, why Indians do Islamic apps like chanting mantras, even knowing the truth? How to control our unacademy-like institutions spreading Hindu phobia? Well, we are discussing the Quran petition. That's something, you know, that's a practical approach, and ultimately, I think we'll need a separate session for that. SP Ram Ram, hello Koenraad. Benjijkelovig. What's that?
Ben gelovig. Yeah, that's Dutch. It means, are you a believer? No, I'm not a believer. I mean, I feel rather at home, you know, on religious occasions. I like the feel of it, but you see, that's a pagan approach to religion. You see, it struck me when I was in Ayodhya long ago, and I met a Hindu pilgrim there, and he explained to me, you know, yeah, I've taken out a few days to be with Lord Ram. You see, he didn't say to pray to Lord Ram, to worship Lord Ram. No, to be with Lord Ram. You see, that is traditionally the world over why people go on pilgrimage. They feel happy at a certain place. They feel inspired at a certain place. And so in the same way, you know, when I go places like the new Kashi Vishwanath, I've never been in the real Kashi Vishwanath, but there is a Kashi Vishwanath temple in the center of the campus of Benares Hindu University. I've been there many times. I mean, I feel okay there. And so Shiva is somehow present there. So in that sense, you see, I am somewhat religious, yes, but I prefer the rational approach to religion. at least in the kind of intellectual work I do. And that's very harmful to religion. But the difference is, in the case of Christianity and Islam, it's totally detrimental because their core beliefs are irrational and don't stand up to criticism. It is not true that Jesus was resurrected. It is not true that the sinfulness of mankind has been cleared as a consequence of his resurrection. It is not true that Muhammad heard the voice of Allah, that the Quran is the definitive word of Allah. This is just not true. This won't stand up. By contrast, you see, in Hinduism, well, there are a few funny beliefs on the side. Like, for instance, on Diwali, some Hindu explained to me that you have to leave your door open because that way, you see, the good spirits can come in and the remaining evil of the past year can go out. Well, well, that's sympathetic. I like that, but strictly speaking, I don't believe that. So in that sense, you see, there are certain beliefs that won't stand up, but they're really quite unimportant. They're the fringes of Hinduism, whereas in the case of Christianity and Islam, they won't survive any rational criticism.
Right. Next. Dev, Hindus don't have single supreme value system. How do we oppose and win over a raider religion without changing our value system? Yeah, Konrad?
That's a very long discussion about what Hinduism really is.
Now we need short answers because we are completely out of time.
Well, not to send you off without anything, I do think Hindus do have a single supreme value system. You see, in the family books of the Rig Veda, it is called Artha. Later, it is called Satya, and that's absolutely basic. That's really at the center. So that you start from that, and that's very good, as a starting point for opposing aggressive religions and surviving them and countering them. No, I think Hinduism is good enough. They do not lack a supreme value system.
Oh yes, Ritu, Satya and Dharma, the threesome, they work together. Next. नीरज श्रीवास्तव, आप तीनों को शंकर जी को आज के इंटरनेट दौर में मोहम्मद का किताब का झूठ कब तक चल पाएगा? ब्लास्फेमी, अपोस्टेसी का दर्द समाप्त का काम गवर्नमेंट क्यों नहीं करती? वेस्ट में भी नहीं हुआ होता तो फर्क पड़ता। शंकर शरण जी।
आज तो मैं तो कोनराड की बात दोहराऊंगा कि वो अपना अनुभव भी कहते हैं और यूरोप में क्रिश्चियनिटी का, चर्च का अनुभव भी कहते हैं, और मैं अपने अनुभव से कम्युनिज्म का अनुभव भी बता सकता हूँ कि ये चीज़ें धीरे धीरे एक क्रिटिकल मास में बदलती हैं। जो आज हो रहा है, अभी कोनराड ने कहा भी कि मुस्लिमों के बीच भी रीथिंकिंग हो रही है, खास करके जहाँ पर मुस्लिम डोमिनेंस है। और ईरान से ऐसे समाचार आ रहे हैं, सऊदी अरब से आ रहे हैं, मोरक्को और जॉर्डन से आ रहे हैं। तो ये धीरे धीरे जमा होता है। तो आज के इंटरनेट के दौर में मुझे भी विश्वास है, और कोनराड ने भी ये कहा है कि मैं कोनराड का फ्रेज ही इस्तेमाल करता हूँ कि इट इज़ ए मैथमेटिकल सर्टेनिटी कि इस्लाम कोलैप्स करेगा, और उसके अपने ही लोग इसको रिफ्यूज़ करेंगे, जैसे कम्युनिज्म के साथ हुआ, सोवियत यूनियन में हुआ, जैसे क्रिश्चियनिटी के साथ हुआ यूरोप में। जो क्रिश्चियन थे उन्होंने ही चर्च जाना बंद कर दिया, जो कम्युनिस्ट थे उन्होंने ही मार्क्सवाद और लेनिनवाद और स्टालिन और कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी के पूरे जो उनका एक डेमी गॉड जैसा रूप था उसको धीरे धीरे छोड़ दिया। तो ये इस्लाम के साथ भी होगा, लेकिन इसके साथ कुछ डिफ़िकल्टीज़ भी हैं, लेकिन जैसा अभी अभी कोनराड ने कहा, मुझे लगता है कि उसमें आपकी बात का उत्तर समाहित है कि अगर आप इसके सत्य को आप अधिक से अधिक फैलाएंगे, जो ये छूट मिली है और इंटरनेट ने सुविधा दी है, और जो दुनिया में इस्लामिक टेररिज्म ने जो उथल पुथल पैदा की है, उसमें इस चीज़ को जितना भी अधिक फैलाया जाएगा, इस्लाम का सत्य, सीरा, प्रोफेट मोहम्मद की जीवनी और कुरान, और इन सब चीज़ों के बारे में जो एसेंशियल फैक्ट्स हैं, सिर्फ फैक्ट्स जो कोनराड अभी कह रहे थे, और उनकी उस किताब में भी है, प्रॉब्लम ऑफ सेकुलरिज्म, उसका जो 10th चैप्टर है वो बहुत ही 10th या 9th चैप्टर है, बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है, जिसमें वो इस्लाम को डिस्कस करते हैं आज के टर्म में। और उसमें यही है कि अगर आप शांति से रहने दें इस्लामी दुनिया को, तो उसमें धीरे धीरे स्वयं ये सेल्फ डाउट बढ़ेगा। ये वायलेंस करने से, उन पर अटैक करने से, उन पर ज़बरदस्ती डेमोक्रेसी थोपने से वो यूनाइट हो जाते हैं और फिर वो लड़ाई का रूप बदल जाता है। तो एजुकेशनल स्ट्रगल को अगर बढ़ाया जाएगा तो ये जल्दी हो सकता है, ऐसा मुझे लगता है।
नेक्स्ट। Vijender, were general people aware of the verses in Calcutta Quran petition when it was filed? Like Wasim Rizvi petition on 26 verses ensured people became aware of 26 verses via internet, social media. Well, it did appear in the newspapers, of course. There were some violent protests as well that were reported. That's what we have, according to Sitaram Goelji himself. He has actually described that. So that's what it was. But I was very much around Calcutta at that time. I didn't learn of it. So in 1980, around 1985, 86, I used to hang around Calcutta. I had done my graduation from Calcutta. I did marine engineering from Calcutta. So I always followed Calcutta and what used to go on in Calcutta. But this one escaped me. So if it escaped me, I doubt how many people would have actually followed it. Rakeshwari, has any effort to reform Islam ever succeeded? Well, Koenraad, can we help?
Yes. About the last question, I still have one sentence to say, namely, today, of course, it's a little bit better to spread information thanks to this internet technology. But even now, you see the books by Sitaram Goel reached a few hundred people. Maybe now on these videos, you reach a few thousand people. Or maybe on your Twitter account, you can reach maybe 10,000 people. But still, you see, on the scale of India, that's still nothing. And so if there is no systematic effort by authorities to spread this news, it can take a very long time before people know about it. Anyway, has there been a successful attempt to reform it? In the, let's say, around 1900, there was a serious attempt at modernization of the Muslim world. And so some people like Ataturk did so by trying to remove Islam altogether. Although if you look at what Ataturk really effectively did, he was still making compromise with Islam. But at any rate, the idea he went public with was to do without Islam. And so laik in Turkish, which is the French word laik, which means secular, that was the big slogan until now Erdogan brought back Islam. But nevertheless, it succeeded at an official level. It also percolated to the population to some extent. Like we have a population of guest workers in Belgium from Turkey. Most of them, upon arrival, were not religious. Unlike the Moroccans coming from Morocco, they were more or less Islamic. But by now, this is 3 generations ago. By now, very many of them are seriously Islamic. And this was fostered also by the Turkish government that became ever more Islamic. So you see that in the long run, that movement was not successful. You know, at the same time, the elites in Iran or in Egypt, you know, saw Islam as some old folklore, you know, that your grandmother still believed in, but that no modern person should believe in. But they didn't fight against it or so. No, they just thought, well, it's over. But again, you see that movement has not succeeded. You know, Islam came back in a big way. So for reform, we have to perhaps look elsewhere. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, whom you might have heard about, an ex-Muslim from Somalia, she wrote serious criticism of Islam itself, and emphasizing that the problem is with Muhammad, not with any superficial circumstances. However, she also saw that this message was only reaching some select few Muslims, ex-Muslims. And so she thought, given the magnitude of the Muslim community, some rather softer approach should also be tried. And so she wrote a book in which she divided Islam into Mecca Islam and Medina Islam, in the sense that the Medina verses of the Quran are more militant. Yes, true, but the Mecca verses form the theoretical preparation for that militancy. You see, to separate them from one another is very artificial. And the militancy is already there in germ in the Meccan verses. If you want to make a separation as a reform that might succeed among practicing Muslims, it is the separation between Allah and Muhammad. You see, there's nothing wrong with Allah. You know, Ishwar Allah Tere Naam, if you really mean Allah and not Islam and Muhammad, if you really mean Allah, then it's correct. And Ram Rahim Ek Hai, if you really mean Rahim, the compassionate one up there, okay, nothing against. I mean, he's the same person essentially as Avalokiteshvara. So that's okay. But you see, Islam means Muhammad. And so if you're talking about Allah, if you're talking about worship, about an annual fast period, about going on pilgrimage, there's nothing wrong with all that. You know, that's what happens in other religions too. Hindus too go on pilgrimage. Hindus too practice fast. You know, it's the person of Muhammad that is the problem. And so if you can somehow separate Islam from Muhammad, then maybe you have a chance. But I don't think anyone has tried that so far. And I'm not very sure it will succeed. As a Persian proverb says, you can make jokes about Allah, but be careful with Muhammad.
Muhammad Hoshiyar.
Ba Khuda Deewana Bashad, Ba Muhammad Hoshiyar. That's it. Okay, next. Where efforts were made to remove offending passages from the Bible and outcome. I think we are very short of time, Rakesh ji, so I think we will pass this over. This is not about Bible here. Next, Vijender. If you write about book model on Quran, where all references to kafir is swapped with mu'min, will that be considered a hateful content? Yes, obviously, very much. You will be judged as a blasphemer. Gustakh, and Gustakh ki saja sartan se juda. Vijender, is it possible to appeal to Calcutta Quran verdict? No longer. It's barred by limitation. Next. Gauri Dhani, the more I listen to Islam, I feel that all the invasions were Islamic jihad, but our history textbooks whitewashed them. No doubt, absolutely. I think we have had a session with Shankar Sharan ji on this about NCRT and other books. Prabhat Kumar, thanks for this beautiful talk, Sanjay ji, and pranam to Koenraad and Shankar ji. Thank you, Prabhat ji. Thank you very much. Next. And Sani, so keeping in view the kind of threat Islam poses to humanity at large since its inception, why can't the entire world debate and corner it? That's easier said than done. I think we already discussed this during the talk. So, yeah.
There's something here.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I would compliment Jaipur dialogues and other forums like Sangam and Atharva and Kali Dasi and so on. There are many new internet forums that do this job. Of course, they're not successful enough yet. Maybe they will reach ever larger audiences. I hope so. But so this effort is being made, but it's not enough yet. And if the government doesn't somehow cooperate or facilitate, it risks taking very long. But there is an earlier question I have something to say on. Whether there has been an effort to remove hateful verses from the Bible. Well, you see, this says something about the Quran, that there is a distinction in the case where such an effort has never taken place, at least not until this Shiite leader went to court to ban these 26 or some number of verses. That's cleansing the Quran, though for strange reasons. But you see, in the case of the Bible, it has happened, and very famously. Jefferson, the second American president, he cut out all the parts of the Bible that he thought were irrational or promoting violence. You see, what he was left with was a very thin book. Nevertheless, you see, he had made a real attempt to cleanse the Bible. So in the case of the Quran, such an attempt, I don't know of any.
Till today, we have got only one Ayodhya temple. What are your views on other temples? Can we get it back? Shankar Sharan ji, कोई chance लगता है आपको?
ये मेरे ख्याल से कोनराड ने इसका अच्छा जवाब दिया है। उनका ये कहना है कि एक एक करके जो आप टेम्पल वापस लेना चाहते हैं, आप मुसलमानों पर काम कीजिए। जैसे उनका फ्रेज है, कोनराड एल्स्ट का ही फ्रेज है कि ये जो सारे मुसलमान हैं, वो समझिए कि वो जैसे रावण के कैद में सीता थी, उसी तरह ये सारे मुसलमान इस्लाम के कैदी हैं। तो आप इनको फ्री कीजिए, ये सारे मस्जिद को लेकर के आपके यहाँ चले आएंगे, वो फिर से अपने आप मंदिर बन जाएगा।
Very good. That's a very great idea. Very great idea. Rakesh Ori, should we not ask the state for protection against violent, malicious Quranic content in place of banning it, which the courts, even in the West, lack courage to do? Well, if you feel that the governments have greater courage, then you only need to witness what is going on in the name of the farmers' protest and what the government is doing, or what is happening in West Bengal and what the government is doing. So don't put too much faith in the government. At least I am very skeptical. Indic says Goelji made a similar study on Christianity. Of course, we discussed this in the last episode. The last episode, last Thursday, same time, 7 p.m., we discussed Sitaram Goelji's book, The Hindu-Christian Encounters. And what were his views on...
3 books.
Yeah.
3 books are there.
What were his views on Gandhi appeasing Islamists? They were very clear. Shankar Sharan ji, would you like to?
Yeah, I think he has written in that book only, which we discussed last time, History of Hindu-Christian Encounters. Or it has a postscript on Gandhi. I think it is a must-read, just 3 pages. And he says that it was Gandhi who started a new terminology in favor of the Islamists, which even they didn't have. This Sarm Dharm Sambhav became a disaster for the Hindus, because before Gandhi, it was never accepted norm to even accept Islam as a religion. Like the Christian missionaries also. Sitaram Goelji says that even Christian missionaries were considered as a unavoidable nuisance. It was Gandhiji who gave them respectability with constant engagement in his newspaper, giving them a space, talking about Sermon on the Mount and making Jesus a star. Otherwise, before Gandhi, neither Islam nor Christianity was accepted among the general people even as a religion. And Goelji mentions that even some Hindu sects who started these kind of things, they were never accepted by the masses, but like the Brahmo Samaj, who tried to give the equal respect to Quran and Bible, etc. It was not accepted. While the main Hindu society was immune to it. It was Gandhiji who gave this Islam respectability. Not only that, he started supporting Khalifat Andolan, which, to my understanding, changed the course of history in India. Before Khalifat movement, the Maulanas were never given political platform, even during the Mughal period. It was this Khalifat movement which Gandhiji I should say started even, because otherwise it was a local thing. Gandhi made it a national issue, and for 2 years it became a national movement. All those Maulana became national leaders, and these masses, which Sri Aurobindo said, कि वो चिंगारी दबी हुई थी और ये खिलाफत ने उसको भड़का दिया. तो जो इस्लाम दब गया था उसको गांधी जी ने भड़का करके एक नेशनल पूरे मुस्लिम कम्युनिटी को फिर से इस्लामिस्ट बना दिया. तो मैं समझता हूँ कि उनकी अपीजमेंट पॉलिसी फिर बाद में जब भारत आज़ाद हो गया तो अंडर द सर्कमस्टांसेस वो फिर से उनको राष्ट्रपिता और तरह तरह की चीज़ें हो गई जो आज तक हम देख रहे हैं कि उनका एक लार्जर देन लाइफ, जैसे स्टालिन ये और लेनिन का जो स्टेट सपोर्टेड इमेज बनाई गई मच लार्जर देन लाइफ, वो गांधी जी की हुई है. तो उसके कारण ये जितने भी इस्लामिस्ट हैं, कम्युनिस्ट हैं, एंटी हिंदूज हैं, वो गांधी जी को इस्तेमाल करके इस्लाम को बहुत मदद पहुंचाते हैं जो अदरवाइज उसके पास नहीं है.
जी, नेक्स्ट Arshad Malve, why atheism of ex-Muslims? Why not refer to their original faiths? Not saying on belief level, but affiliation level. Well, both approaches will work. Anyway, I think we are totally out of time, so I will just say that let us discuss this elsewhere. Thank you to all viewers. आप सभी दर्शकों को बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. Thank you, Koenraad, and thank you, Shankar Sharan ji. I think we need to continue this series. So, what would be the next? What would be the next book? Let's decide it here and now.
His last publication was about Nehruism.
Oh, yes, that would be wonderful.
I mean, all his books are worth talking about, but this is one that happens to have been agitating my mind recently. So that's what I think about. Yeah, let's do that.
So next Thursday, 7 p.m. same time. Okay, so with that, we say Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Namaskar.